Ndio.
Yes, I hope you're doing well. Yeah, so we're going to look at conceptual frameworks. This is very important, especially for people who are already writing their research proposals. In one of the sections, is in the introduction chapter, chapter 1, you can include the conceptual framework, or you can use what you call a theoretical framework. So we are going to look at what basically we are going to concentrate on a conceptual framework. We shall also look at a little bit at the theoretical frameworks and how we can basically use them in research. So in this section, you should be able to define what a conceptual framework is, why is it very important in health research, and then what are the components that make the components of a conceptual framework and how do they relate with one another. And then you should be able to know the steps of developing a conceptual framework and be able to apply it in uh, your research proposal. And then we'll look at the different types of conceptual frameworks and also look at the strengths and limitations of these frameworks. Okay, we will also understand how to use a conceptual framework in guiding research, the research process, especially from design, um, analysis, and interpretation of the research findings. So, a conceptual framework is a tool that allows researchers to organize and connect the main ideas and concepts of their research topic. So basically, the interpretation here is that when you have a research topic that you want to investigate, you will get the main ideas about these research topics. And this research topic has what you call variables, variables or concepts that are very important to it. So you use a conceptual framework to be able to demonstrate how these concepts, how these variables, and also how the prepositions of the research are actually related. Okay, so we look at those aspects. With the research, you investigate, let us say, for example, you're investigating the factors that influence the uptake of family planning in a given community. Okay, so the factors could be social, could be economic, could be political, could be having religious connections. So how all these factors or how all these concepts relate to the main point of the utilization of family planning. So basically, we use conceptual frameworks to be able to see, to demonstrate to the reader that these factors are related to the main research topic in this way. Okay, so that is basically what we mean by a conceptual framework. It is a set of interrelated concepts, assumptions, propositions that guide and inform a research study. Okay, in other resources do relate a conceptual framework to a housing plan, a house plan, what we call a blueprint for a house. the engineer will build a house according to the blueprint, okay, where the wall will pass, where the fence will go, and all other aspects of the building, where they will be constructed, depends on the blueprint. So a conceptual framework is looked at as the blueprint for research. It guides you on how you're going to conduct your research. Okay, you will realize that the conceptual framework will guide you on the kinds of questions that you will have, research questions, the kinds of research objectives that you will have, the kinds of the methodology, the variables that you will have, and even how you interpret your research findings. All these will be guided by the conceptual framework. So we usually call that a blueprint for research. Okay. So why do we have to really use a conceptual framework? The conceptual framework is very important to the researcher, but also to the person who is reading the research work. Okay, the researcher and then the person who is reading the research work. For the person who is reading the research work, the conceptual framework allows him or her to be able to understand the key concepts in the research, but also is able to understand the arguments that are being fronted by the researcher. Okay, so because when we have this research topic will not tell us everything about the research, but the conceptual framework can allow the reader to be able to understand the viewpoint or the kind of argumentation that is being fronted by the researcher. Okay, and then point number 2 is that because the conceptual framework is allows us to interconnect or to demonstrate how variables, concepts, prepositions, assumptions are related. So we can be able to understand or even get an explanation for how these things are actually related to one another, how the variables are related to one another, the key assumptions that are being made, and what kinds of variables are we going to look at, and how are we going to even take our measurements when collecting data. Okay. The other thing is that the conceptual framework also allows us to really get the other elements of research. The key things that I earlier on mentioned, that the conceptual framework allows us to know the kinds of research questions that we are going to have, the objectives, the research objectives, the methodology, interpretation, and even the analysis itself. Okay, so the conceptual framework allows us to generate those elements of research. So also in a related manner, we are saying that the conceptual framework is very important because it gives us the picture of how the research will be in terms of the scope, the objectives, the research questions, methodology, and how the analysis will be done. But also provides a common language and a shared understanding of the phenomena under investigation. Often, we get conceptual frameworks from theories, established theories, okay, or even let us say literature, and therefore everyone almost knows some of these frameworks that we use. So that means that there is a language that we are commonly using in investigating different phenomena. Okay, because you're not in most cases you will not create something new, you create something that has been used often, but that also does not mean that you cannot create a new conceptual framework. Okay, so we can communicate research findings and the implications to the different audiences because the conceptual framework allows us to simplify the the key concepts that it makes it very easy for different audiences to really understand. Okay, so it's very important in that way. Conceptual frameworks also help researchers design their studies by providing a clear and coherent structure for data collection, analysis, and interpretation. We can say that the conceptual framework provides us with the direction for the research. Okay, it provides us with the direction for the research. That means that throughout the research process, we are using the conceptual framework. Okay, it guides us on during the design process, during the data collection, the analysis, the interpretation, okay, which is basically how the findings will be reported. That is basically the interpretation. And these will all be guided by the conceptual framework. So the conceptual framework consists of the following. One, the central concept of phenomena under investigation. For example, in our example, where you're looking at the factors that influence the utilization of family planning services. Okay, the central issue here is about the factors associated with utilization of family planning, but there are also related concepts or variables to this topic or this main concept. Okay, so where you have these variables, whether they are social demographic factors, where we include the issues to do with whether it is age, level of education, income, and things like that. Okay, so what are the other related variables or concepts that influence the main issue, which is basically the factors associated with utilization of family planning? And then what assumptions, prepositions, hypotheses are you going to apply? Okay, this is to say that if you're going to use a conceptual framework, if you're going to adapt an existing conceptual framework, most of them come with assumptions that are actually well defined. So most likely you'll take those, or you'll adopt those assumptions, or you can actually create your own assumptions or hypotheses or propositions. Okay, so still the same kinds of the same kind of explanation also lies here, and it's basically related to the significance of the conceptual framework, which you have said is basically the blueprint for which you can use in the research process through design, data collection, data analysis, and interpretation. So we have another one, which is called the theoretical framework. Often different textbooks will refer to this or will use it synonymously with the word conceptual framework. These are actually different. Conceptual framework is different from a theoretical framework. Okay, how? A theoretical framework does not test. A conceptual framework does not test a specific theory, but rather it is a general perspective or orientation for the research. Whereas a theoretical framework basically relies on a particular theory, okay, or even theories that can be tested and then explained in the research study that is undertaken. So let's look at the different ways in which a theoretical framework is different from a conceptual framework. Okay, so first thing is that a theoretical framework is rooted in theories or models or even paradigms. Whereas a conceptual framework is how you, the researcher, understand the research problem that you're actually investigating. Okay, and then you relate the different factors or variables that are related to the problem that you're investigating. That's point number one. Point number two is about the fact that theoretical frameworks are more abstract and general, but conceptual frameworks can vary in abstraction and may include abstract and concrete elements. Okay, and then the other one is that theoretical frameworks provide a theoretical perspective on a research problem. Okay, this is to say that if you have a research problem that you're investigating, you give it a theoretical dimension. What theory can explain the research problem that is happening, basically? Whereas the conceptual framework provides the structure, which we said it provides the blueprint for you to use in understanding the research problem that you basically have. Okay, and then the focus of a theoretical framework is on explaining why, theories that help in explaining why certain things happen, whereas conceptual frameworks broadly look at what and how basically certain variables are related, or the relationship between different variables can be easily demonstrated using a conceptual framework. And then a theoretical framework may not be directly linked to practical application, whereas in conceptual framework, it's basically how you can use how you can use different concepts and relate them to practical application. Okay, so conceptual frameworks are more about application, are more about what we can call empirical application or practical application. Okay, a theoretical framework allows us to develop hypotheses and then also research questions, whereas conceptual frameworks basically guide through us through the whole research process, where you look at the design, the data collection, analysis, interpretation, and even how this is basically how the report research findings can be communicated. And then the level of details. A theoretical framework is more detailed. It provides a comprehensive and an abstract framework, whereas a conceptual framework may not may include or may not go into details of the theoretical aspects of the phenomena that is being investigated. So the conceptual framework is more narrow, is narrower than the theoretical framework. So the theoretical framework is broad, okay, is broad compared to is broad compared to the theoretical framework. Okay, just go here. So we have looked at the difference between a theoretical framework and then a conceptual framework. But we can also have different types of conceptual frameworks. Okay, so the first one here is what we call the analytical framework, which is basically, remember, when you're talking about the conceptual framework, the conceptual framework is about how you, the researcher, understands the research problem that you're investigating or the research phenomena. So it means, therefore, you can represent what you understand in terms of how you understand the research problem in your own way. So you have more freedom in a conceptual framework than in a theoretical framework. So that means that uh, you can still create your own framework, um, and the different variables or concepts that are related to what you're basically investigating. So one of the ways in which you can do that is by breaking down a very complex research problem that you have into simpler, manageable components that you're going to investigate. And when you do that, you're basically using what we call an analytical framework. Okay, so this, when you break things into smaller, manageable components that you're going to investigate, it allows you to to be able to understand what you're investigating, but also it enables your readers to be able to understand these concepts quite well. Okay, so we use the analytical framework basically in data analysis and interpretation, such that you can easily create patterns, themes, and the trends in the data that you already have. And it's commonly used in qualitative, but you can also still use it in quantitative research. And then we have what you call operational frameworks. This relates to how you're putting practical aspects of your research, you're putting practical dimensions to your research. Okay, so this is basically very important in especially designing your variables, measurement tools, and then also how data will actually be collected, and how you link your research to the the, the practical aspects of implementation. Okay, so operational frameworks allow you to to design the tools that you'll use to in measuring the variables, and allows you, if you have very good tools, then it means issues to do with validity, consistency, and reliability will be actually optimal. And then the last one, the last framework that you're going to talk about is the pragmatic framework. Still, this actually gives you room to adjust things the way you want. You're linking theoretical perspective with practical considerations. And you can really apply this in a real life or real world issue that you're actually investigating. Okay, so it provides a bridge between theory and practice, which is very, very, very important. So where do you get the conceptual frameworks that you're going to apply? Already, I've talked about the fact that you get them from the literature that you read. We have established conceptual frameworks that people are commonly using, but you can also derive a framework from different theories, but also your personal experience about a research problem, and then you can derive the different concepts and the variables that are related to the research problem that you have. So that is a personal experience. So you have the resources of conceptual frameworks. So in public health, in nutrition, in productive health, in nursing and others, I've given you examples of conceptual frameworks that you can use, but this is not the end of I mean, these are not the only conceptual frameworks that you can actually use. You have quite many. Okay, because we have a lot of them in, for example, in almost every module we have different conceptual frameworks. For example, in health promotion, we have the health belief model, the trans-theoretical model, we have the socio-ecological model. We also use the social determinants of health framework. We have the socio-cognitive theory, the theory of planned action. These are commonly in health promotion, but also other, for example, other models in, let us say, health economics. We have them. We have other models also that can be used in the different disciplines of public health. So these are not the only conceptual frameworks that you can use. So if you have chosen one of these frameworks, how are you going to, where are you going to put them? Okay, and how are you going to 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 use them in your research proposal? Okay, conceptual framework. One thing that I had not earlier on explained is the fact that you need to have a conceptual framework. In most cases, is diagrammatic in nature. Okay, so this having a diagrammatic um, conceptual framework yeah, so one key thing that I was actually explaining is that conceptual frameworks mainly used in terms of diagrammatic format, which we are basically calling here the graphic presentation. We can also have the narrative presentation of the conceptual framework. So when we talk about the graphic representation, we are basically having the concepts, the assumptions, the variables, and how they relate to one another. How the different variables influence the other. Okay, so we usually use arrows to illustrate this, to show the direction of what affects what. Okay, in terms of the causal relationship. Okay, who is entering with an open mic?
Yes, this is George.
Yes, you have a question.
I don't have a question, but a lot of noise are down there, and we are actually on the deck shed, and the people are making noise, especially children. Why?
Your reader to strain their minds in trying to get what you're basically communicating. Keep it on one page. Okay, don't have a conceptual framework that moves from one page to the other. Keep it in one page. um, you can have different inputs, different sources where you can which you can use to incorporate into your conceptual framework. Remember, the conceptual framework provides you with the framework for which you use for your research, and you get it from different perspectives or different sources, literature, theory, your personal experiences. Okay, so if you incorporate all these inputs, you will have a good conceptual framework. Make sure that it is very consistent, and you can adjust it as you go on. As you understand the research problem, you can always adjust it. There is always no problem. Um, the key thing is that it should have a lot of meaning. Simplify it. Don't make it very complicated. But of course, you may not master it from the first research, but as you go on with uh, with your research that you conduct during your career, you'll get more experience and perhaps have better conceptual frameworks than now. And then you can basically explain your conceptual framework in using texts, okay, other than using figures or a diagram or flowchart, whatever it is. You can use words to explain how you understand and how you're going to basically investigate the research phenomena that you have. Okay. Of course, this has and benefits and also weaknesses associated with it. But if you combine perspectives, for example, you have the diagrammatic representation of the conceptual framework, and then you add it with text. Okay, you have text that really explains what the diagram is all about. That's about combining the approaches. Still, having one page, um, one page for the graphical model is very important, and also basically having the narrative or the explanation uh, for the diagrammatic conceptual framework or the graphical conceptual framework is also very, very important. So whether it is narrative, whether it is diagrammatic or graphic, make sure that you keep it simple, coherent. That is, there is an element of logic, consistency. Uh, it is easily relatable. Someone can easily understand what you're basically talking about. That's the key for whether you're using narrative or even graphical presentation of your conceptual framework. Okay, so use both. That could help. Okay, narrative and also a graphical representation. Okay, if there are key terminologies, concepts that you really need to define at that moment, you can really do that. So you can really make that clarification just there, and have a clear balance between the visuals. The visuals are basically the graphics, or the graphical representation of your conceptual framework, and then the text is the narrative part. So have a balance. If you you don't want to have a very small graphical representation of your conceptual framework and then a lot of text, that means the balance is not coming out. But you want to have something that is um, easily visualized, but also easily understood in terms of text. You have text that is well organized to give more understanding to the visuals that you have. So how do you develop the conceptual framework? Of course, like I said, the conceptual framework has to be in the introduction chapter of your research work. Okay, so that means that by the time you identify your research topic, you're already starting to investigate about it, read around it, read if, for example, it is a factors that affect the uptake of family planning methods. You already started to read about uh, the different factors and then the different models or theories that are related to uptake of family planning methods. Okay, so you basically build knowledge around that, and then mm, as you start to read, or as you're reading, you basically generate the concepts, the variables that are basically very important to your research topic, which is step number 3. And then step number 4 is that you need to use the concepts that you have read about, the different concepts and their definitions, and then you start to apply them in your own setting, in your own research. Okay, you operationalize the concepts to the research that you're actually conducting. Establish the relationships. For example, you have read about the fact that age influences family planning. You have read about the fact that age influences family planning uptake, socioeconomic factors, those who are employed, those who are not employed. You know the how the level of education impacts uptake of family planning. You know all these different factors. Okay, and now you start to either categorize them and so how. For example, those that increase uptake, which ones are they? Those that decrease uptake, which ones are they? Okay, and which is the central topic. So you basically start to draw your graphic representation of the factors this side and the factors that side, and then the main point or the central concept in the middle. And then you start to use the different arrows to demonstrate uh, how they actually influence uh, the central point or the central concept. Okay. And then you now basically just have that drawing, and that's the conceptual framework. And then a few words to basically explain that conceptual framework. And that's that. Okay. Clearly, having defining your variables is very, very important. Okay. For example, if you're going to say let us say it, one of the factors that influence uptake of family planning could be uh, access to family planning in terms of distance. Okay. So, what is the recommended distance where one can perhaps access family planning uh, methods? Okay. So, at what point are you going to say that um, the 3 kilometers is a long distance, and then 2 kilometers is a short distance? Okay. So that's why it is very important for you to operationalize the definitions. What can apply somewhere may not apply in your research. So that is the importance of operationalizing what research. Um, for example, if you still talk about access, you can look at access in terms of distance, but also you can also look at access in terms of whether you have access to mobile family planning services. Okay, the family planning services can be far, 4 kilometers away, but if we have mobile family planning services where if I need COCs, I can just go to my phone and then send a request, and then the following day it is delivered. That may not be an issue of access in terms of long distance. Okay, so that's why operationalizing definitions of variables is very, very important. It provides consistency, and it makes sure that your research findings actually fit well into the existing research. So the challenges that people face in creating conceptual framework, one of the obvious challenges is if you really don't know what a conceptual framework is, then you will not be able to actually make one. The first thing is you need to know what a conceptual framework is. What are its components, which we said that a conceptual framework has assumptions, it has concepts, it has prepositions, it has variables, and how all these actually relate to one another. So you need to know all these things. Okay, know what the concepts are in your research, know what the variables are in your research, and then show how these are actually related to one another. What influences the other? What is having a causal relationship with the other? Okay, and then the other problem is that you just pick any conceptual framework from anywhere and then throw it into your research. That cannot work. You need to get a conceptual framework that aligns well with your research topic and what you basically want to investigate in terms basically like what you said. A conceptual framework is a blueprint for your research work. It's a conceptual framework that allows you to to generate research questions that are very relevant, objectives, and then also the methodology. Okay, so that means that if you don't get, it's just like if you don't get um, if you don't get the house plan um, well, you not have a good house. That's basically it is. That is how it is. If you have a good plan, then you have a good house. If you don't have a good conceptual framework, you will not have good research. Okay, because it is the conceptual framework that guides the research questions, objectives, methodologies, and also the interpretation. Okay. Um, of course, one of the reasons as to why we actually conduct research is that there could be gaps, and we said that the gaps can be in terms of evidence, in terms of knowledge, in terms of practice. Okay, and this can actually exist, and if this exists, it makes it very hard to have a very consistent uh, conceptual framework. But that still does not make you to have a very good conceptual framework. It's just a disadvantage that you can have, but it doesn't mean that you can't get a good conceptual framework that is acceptable. So what are the things that you really need to do? Understand your research topic very well. Even from off head, you should be knowing what is known and what is not known. Like that, you know, uh, when you know what is known, you can be able to know how they actually influence and how they are actually related to your research topic. This is very, very important. Okay, so first review the relevant literature and the theories that are applicable to your central concept. Okay, and then also have a concise research problem, uh, problem statement, and then research questions. Okay, and then you can draw your diagrammatic representation, explain the assumptions, prepositions, and hypotheses, if any. It doesn't mean that for every conceptual framework you will have assumptions, preposition, and hypotheses. No, you may not have them. But if you have them, explain explain them and why they actually need to be there. So provide a justification. Okay. As you continuously carry out research, especially in qualitative research, you can come back and refine your conceptual framework. Okay. In qualitative research, you collect data. As you collect data, it leads you even to go back and do literature review, and even it can take you back to correcting and adjusting your methodology. That is qualitative research. Okay, so as you go on with data collection, you can always refer backwards and make adjustments here and there. So you can incorporate new ideas, new perspectives, new theories, and even methodologies as you go on with your research. As we shall look at later, conceptual frameworks may not be uniform across different disciplines, but you have conceptual frameworks that can be applied across disciplines. Conceptual frameworks in public health can be applied in nursing, for example. The health belief model is one of them. It's there in public health, it's also there in nursing. Okay, so you can get the best practices of using conceptual frameworks from different disciplines. How do you, if you're, for example, a research supervisor, how would you look at a conceptual framework and realize that no, this one is not a good one? And say, how do you say, yes, this one is actually good? How do you say that, okay, this one is good but needs adjustments? How do you make those decisions? So this is about evaluating conceptual frameworks. What are the issues that you look at? One is validity. Validity is the extent to which a framework accurately represents the phenomena of interest and the research questions. Okay, this is what I say that you do. We don't have what we call one size fits all. This is to say that you cannot just pick a framework and then use it in your research work if it is not which when it cannot accurately represent the topic that you're actually investigating. Okay, that is validity. And then reliability is the degree of consistency and coherence of the framework across the different contexts and applications. If you apply the health belief model in the public health, does it give you the same findings if you apply it in nursing, for example, which is a completely different field or different a different discipline? Okay, if you apply health belief model in South Sudan and also the health belief model in, let us say, Uganda, do we have any consistency in terms of what you get out? Okay, so that is very important. It's about reliability. And then generalizability, which is It's about the applicability and transferability of the framework to other dimensions and settings. Okay. Uh, if you did an investigation among the students of Bristol using that framework, if you use that framework among the students of other universities, you get similar finding. Okay, that's about transferring the findings, generalizing the findings. If you do research on a small population, if you do the same kind of research in another similar setting, you get similar findings. Okay, can you apply them in another setting? That's what you call generalizing. Clarity, you have the variables, the concept, prepositions, assumptions, and everything well explained, and they are in line with the research problem that you're investigating. And then coherence is, do you have logical consistency, and the level of organization is actually optimal to show how different concepts are actually related to one another, and it is actually sufficient evidence to back that up. And then comprehensiveness. This is to look at the different relevant concepts or prepositions that are related to the problem under investigation. Is your framework covering all these aspects? If you're looking at the factors, for example, are all these factors going to fit into your framework? Or there are some factors that are going to be left out? That's an issue to do with comprehensiveness. Relevance, is it very applicable to the research problem that you're investigating, given the context and setting, or it is not? And then usefulness. Does it help? Does the framework actually help you in your research, or it doesn't? Does it provide you the direction and the guidance, or it does not? It's very important to look at that. And then one of the last aspects is an issue to do with the conceptual frameworks across different disciplines. Like I've used the example of application of conceptual frameworks in nursing, in public health, in nursing, in public health, healthcare management. Okay, we have conceptual frameworks that can be used across, depending on basically what you're investigating. But of course, these conceptual frameworks um, have assumptions that are linked to methodological approaches across the different disciplines. Okay, some of those can be cross-cutting. For example, social sciences as a discipline can have its own methodological assumptions and frameworks that they actually use, but you can still use them in public health. Okay, so here we are basically saying that different disciplines can have different conceptual frameworks um, that you can actually use depending on the different orientations of the research problem, whether it is epistemological, ontological, uh, or methodological orientation. But keep remembering the fact that the conceptual framework is not something that is fixed, that you just apply to your research work. That is something that you can basically adjust and make changes to fit into your research problem that you're actually investigating. Okay, so that marks the end of this presentation. If you have any questions.